everybody, and welcome to our PowerPoint presentation over educational public relations. This presentation will be by Cameron Graham, Allie Price, and myself, Rima Cowherd.
For our presentation, we will each be discussing 3 different topics. I, Cameron, will talk about what education PR is, the history of education PR, and the responsibilities of an education PR professional. Rima will be discussing the importance of educational PR, the advantages and disadvantages of the field, and introducing our first case study. Allie will be discussing where education PR overlaps with other branches of PR, discussing our second case study, and also introducing our discussion questions. Alright, hello. My name is Cameron. I'm a second-year journalism major, and today I will be discussing the history of educational PR, defining educational PR, and explaining the duties and responsibilities of a professional working in education PR. So before looking at what the field looks like today, I think it's important to be familiarized with the roots of educational PR. So starting with this quote, "The history of educational public relations, indeed the history of any kind of public relations, has its roots in surprisingly recent times as a formal profession. But the fact is that the public relations function has been carried out by governments and other social institutions since the earliest days of civilization." I wanted to include that quote because I think it's interesting that it emphasizes the natural importance of human perception and relationships for an organization or business. Public relations and education were first formally talked about together in 1923 when Harlan C. Hines and Robinson D. Jones published their book, Public School Publicity. It's also important to note that this is the same year that Edward Bernays published his book, Crystallizing Public Opinion. In the years after that, a few more books were written about the field, but there was no legitimate or formal organization yet for the field. Alright, so fast forward a few years to 1935 when a group of specialists in school public relations meet up to attend the annual convention of the National Education Association in Denver, Colorado. This group decides they want to create a new organization specifically for school public relations, and this becomes known as the National Association for Educational Publicity. 23 members are enrolled in the 1935-36 school year. As PR as a whole begins to expand, and it becomes increasingly important to all sorts of organizations and businesses, this influenced the name change, the first name change to the School Public Relations Association. By 1950, the association became a full-fledged department, or the National Education Association, and its name was changed to the National School Public Relations Association, which is the name for the organization today. So now that we know a little bit about education public relations history, we can go ahead and start defining what educational public relations actually is. The NSPRA professional definition of educational public relations is a planned and systematic management function to help improve the programs and services of an educational organization. It relies on a comprehensive two-way communications process involving both internal and external publics, with the goal of stimulating a better understanding of the role, objectives, accomplishments, and needs of the organization. Educational public relations assist in interpreting public attitudes, identify and help shape policies and procedures in the public interest, and carry on involvement and information activities which earn public understanding and support. Personally, I see this definition as somewhat vague, and I think it can encompass any sort of public relations. So later on, I'll be discussing the responsibilities of a educational public relations professional, which will really help define more of what those working in education public relations actually do. Here's another quote that approaches what education PR is in sort of a different manner. It reads, "Today's school public relations is less about conveying information than it is about establishing and promoting partnerships within the community, An effective school public relations plan provides value by giving people information they can use, not just information that the school needs to convey about process. Effective public relations means schools ask for and receive information just as much as they transmit it. So this quote kind of emphasizes that educational PR isn't just schools and school districts spewing out a bunch of information. It's about creating and maintaining relationships within a school or community. This approach emphasizes that the public is still largely sympathetic to the mission of public education, and people today want to be a part of any changes that are planned at their local schools. So now that we know more of what the goals of educational public relations are, we can start talking about some of the things that professionals within this field do to reach those goals. So to start this list of major functions, an educational PR professional will act as a public relations counsel. This means taking a proactive stance and anticipating problems and providing solutions to those problems. They will also manage communication with internal and external publications. This means handling all aspects of a school or district's publication, such as its external newspaper and internal newsletter, among other sources. They will also handle media relations. This means serving as the media's liaison with a school or school district. This can mean writing news releases for all local newspapers or the TV and radio. And also, they work to get media coverage of school district or school news. They may also handle budget and bond issue campaigns. So not only will they develop budget and bond issue campaigns and publications, but they will stay closely attuned to the entire budget making process and promote community input. So continuing with more major functions, an education PR professional will handle communications planning and crisis communications planning. So they'll write and develop a communications plan for the district in times of crisis. They will also conduct public relations research, surveys, polls, and informal research. They will do this to determine public opinion and attitude as a basis for planning and action. They may also be in charge of school district imaging and marketing. This means promoting the district's strengths and achievements and its solutions to problems. Student and staff recognition is a super important duty of any education PR professional because it really builds that relationship and community for a school or district. All right, moving on to the last three major functions of an education PR professional. An education PR professional will act as an information station for the district. They will answer public and new resident requests for information. They may also act as a public relations trainer, so they will provide public relations training to staff and PTAs in areas such as talking to the media and communicating in a crisis. Lastly, they will act as a community relations liaison. They'll serve as the district's liaison with community groups such as civic associations and service clubs. To sum up the responsibilities of an educational PR practitioner, we can look back to our definition of what educational PR is. These programs are meant to assist in interpreting public attitudes, identify and help shape policies and procedures in the public interest, and carry on involvement and information activities which earn public understanding and support for a school, district, or university. Thank you.
In this slide, I will be going over the importance of educational public relations. Public relations is defined as management of communications between an organization and its publics, or the strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. This is by Keller, and this is coming from our textbook. So how or why is this particularly important to educational public relations specifically? Educational institutions like college institutions, high school institutions, these are the ones that go ahead and make up organizations. And the people that go ahead and surround these educational institutions, like the staff, the students, and typically volunteer workers, those are the ones who consist of the publics. This definition is important to go ahead and reconcile with how educational PR specifically goes ahead and is able to bring out communication with the staff and students and the educational institution. So, for instance, sports and entertainment at CSU, that is a cross-sectional way to go ahead and see how the educational institution is able to communicate to the public that they're going to have Janae Aiko at CSU, or there's going to be a game at Boulder. These consist of public relations that are from the educational institution. As well, they're able to go ahead and bring forth a beneficial relationship with their public. So these students and staff typically go ahead and go follow these sorts of Twitter pages, or they go to certain websites because of the fact that they have a relationship with them and they believe that they will present the information that they are needing to communicate effectively. For this slide, I will be going over the advantages and disadvantages of educational public relations. So first off, for an advantage, educational public relations isn't as exciting or seen as cool compared to other forms of public relations. A lot of times, sports and entertainment or social media are more competitive forms. So this can lead to educational public relations not being as competitive. Another advantage includes educational PR can go ahead and cross with a lot of times other forms of PR to gain publics. So educational institutions like colleges can go ahead and use social media. They can go ahead and announce sports or entertainment as a form of getting more students to come in. These are all forms of being able to get a bigger public and also cross-section with like sports, entertainment, or social media. Another advantage would be that working within educational public relations is extremely valued and is important because education will most seemingly continue to happen and never close. So you can gain a lot of professionalism throughout your career going throughout this specific field. And another advantage would be educational public relations is starting to use social media and technology more. Just throughout this entire pandemic, for instance, we've been needing to communicate throughout laptops, throughout Zoom, Teams. So educational PR, educational institutions are needing to go ahead and make that shift as well, and they have been doing that effectively. For this slide, I will be going over this particular case study that involves Colorado State University's men's basketball team and how their coach, Larry Usachi, was under investigation for allegedly abusing the men's basketball team. And this was also the second time that he was investigated from CSU for these actions throughout his 6 years being a coach. So with this particular case, it was interesting, at least for me, to go ahead and go over because I worked in the CSU men's basketball team during that time in 2018. And I do go ahead and remember the coach going ahead and leaving, the resignation, and the office being very quiet and hush-hush. So it was very interesting to go ahead and take a look at this case in the eyes of an educational public relations ideal, because the fact that Larry Usachi went ahead and brought tremendous growth towards the men's basketball team. He was known for CSU as being the winningest coach in school history. And throughout that year, he was also nominated for, I believe, the Coaches Award or Best Coach Award. So all of these things were tremendous figure to the reason that he was able to resign rather than get fired, as well receive a settlement from CSU. And throughout that time, it was also interesting the fact that Larry Usachi went ahead and was under these allegations towards February 3rd, and then he was not able to talk to the players, he was not able to talk to the players' family, the students, he needed to be quiet, and then towards the end of February is when they finally came to an agreement towards that resignation settlement. But this particular case study is able to play a role with educational public relations because of the fact that Colorado State University is, for one, an educational institution, and that is an organization. And then the students, the staff, the men's basketball team, that's all the public. So for the public relations team, they're needing to go ahead and communicate effectively to the staff, students, families, all of these people that are included within this public about the alleged abusive behavior of the men's basketball coach and how they're dealing with that, how they're moving forward, and how that's also going to play a role towards the players because of the fact that they're the ones who were abused or allegedly abused. So they need to go ahead and have a comfortable setting, be able to go to campus and not have any rough interactions with anybody. And that's that educational public relations job, is to make sure that that resignation settlement makes sure that that moves along smoothly and doesn't cause any indifferences.
Okay, in the following slides, I will be addressing where education public relations overlaps with other branches of public relations. In this slide specifically, I'll be addressing where sports PR crosses the line with education PR. In 5WPR's article entitled The Value of Public Relations in Education, the writer explains that education often crosses lines with athletic and sports public relations to help their students and to ultimately better their reputation. Education bodies also hire PR firms to give athletes and their respective sports teams better opportunities. So yes, working with scouts from major universities and sometimes even professional teams, some athletes are lucky enough to be drafted into the pros right out of high school. Education PR specialists play a crucial role in not just the future of the student/athlete's life, but also the overall reputation of the educational establishment as well. They get a big brand name, I guess you would say, once they produce a student that has become a pro athlete and they know that their athletic programs are going well. A lot of times this is where higher education systems like high schools and colleges will get most of their financial endorsements. Unfortunately for the category of education, the economy favors pro athletic ability more than anything else extracurricular or even academic within the educational world. And we can go more into that in a few slides here. But yes, this is where sports and education merge in the PR world. Okay, moving forward, I will be talking about where educational public relations crosses the lines with digital and social public relations. In her article entitled Why Schools Need Public Relations, Maris Callahan states, "The media is a powerful force that can help any organization spread news, information, and trends to the public. In some cases, the information may be high level, like announcing administrative changes or national test score results. In other cases, a school might want to announce events, fundraisers, or award recognition. So yes, within recent decades, the education system has had to familiarize more with the digital side of public relations as social media has risen within the last 15 years or so. And it's just been proven that digital and social communication has proven to be much more efficient and more convenient, as you can get the information that you need on command, whereas the print form of communication has become significantly less convenient. For example, the school's publics may have needed to get info that was urgent, and they would have to wait for it to come into the mail, or they would have to pick it up at the front office of the educational facility, or solely rely on their child that attends the facility to get them the information that they need, which is not always ideal. So yes, particularly I think that this has become much more important this year in 2020 with COVID-19, the global pandemic, moving schools to online learning, and everything just kind of up in the air and not knowing where things are heading. So digital public relations working in tandem with educational public relations has thrived, particularly in the year 2020, I think. Okay, in this slide in particular, I will be talking more about where education PR stands out and differs from other branches of public relations rather than talking about it overlapping with other branches. So it's no secret that the education system struggles in the financial department. We hear a lot about teachers not being paid enough and public school systems just not getting the right funds that they need from the government. So further down in her article, Maris Callahan explains, as the economy continues to struggle, schools across the country are losing funding for arts, physical education, and extracurricular activities that are essential for student development. By helping communicate a school or district's fiscal needs to its taxpayers, PR can help improve the educational experience for students over the long term. So yes, for many years, the education system has suffered financially as it is difficult to receive the ideal amount of money from the government. Therefore, it's more likely for public relations firms that work for school systems to be heavily involved in organizing fundraisers, looking for sponsors, stakeholders, and even college scouts. This relates back to what I was mentioning earlier about there being more money in finding college scouts or even pro-athletic organization scouts, because that's probably where most of the money for their school will be coming from, and why typically there is much more money invested in a school's athletic program rather than any of the other programs like fine arts or any other extracurricular activities. Shifting gears here, I'm going to be discussing the Penn State sexual assault scandal for our next case study. I got this case study from the 5WPR article, which states, back in 2012, Penn State suffered a lot of bad press following the child molestation charges against Gerald Sandusky, a football coach on campus. The college spent millions of dollars on big firms like Ketchum and Edelman. In their best PR move yet, the college then informed the public that donations, student tuition, and taxpayer money will not be used to pay these bills. So for the PR firm that worked with Penn State, Ketchum and Edelman, their major focus here was to redeem the university's overall reputation. With accusations of this magnitude that involve a situation that is traumatic and revolting, it's enough to send any major university or even a small college down the drain. It's enough to send their reputation down the drain. So this ties back to crisis response strategies. Ketchum and Edelman had to figure out how they as a PR firm were going to respond to this crisis for Penn State. And they had the options to either deny, diminish, rebuild, or reinforce. So unfortunately, this wouldn't be the way that I would have handled the situation, but Ketchum and Edelman decided to handle this scandal by diminishing the overall situation and reinforcing all the good things that Penn State had done in the past. Personally, I don't think that this would be, I guess there isn't really a right or wrong route, but my morale and ethics just don't lie with this outcome at all. I think the diminishing the overall situation is disrespecting the victims in this case, and reinforcing all the good that Penn State has done in the past really doesn't fix anything as far as the school's reputation, other than reminding all the things that they have done in the past, and not at all mentioning what good they will be doing in the future. So personally, I would have tried to handle this situation by rebuilding, taking responsibility for the situation, maybe even just a little bit of denial, not in the sense of that they are denying that the situation happened, but more so denying that they had nothing to do with the football coach's actions. It was the football coach that had done this. It was not Penn State that had done this, but at the same time, rebuilding the reputation and just letting the publics know that they are doing everything that they can to take full responsibility and to ensure that a scandal or a terrible situation like this ever happens again. All right, finally closing out our education public relations presentation, we wanted to post some questions regarding our case studies that we presented. So our discussion questions include these two. For our first case study, we want to know, do you think that the settlement with the CSU case study was ethically correct from a public relations standpoint? And would you have handled the situation differently? If so, how would you? And for our second case study regarding the Penn State sexual assault child molestation case, we want to know, how would you as a PR firm representing the school handle a crisis like the scandal at Penn State? And which of the crisis response strategies would you use? Would you use just one of them or multiple strategies? And just sort of walk us through how you would handle a situation like that. And yes, just answer those discussion questions for us, and thank you all for listening.